Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm making two cards that feature die cuts that are on the smaller side that sort of serve as the central point of the card. Typically when I make cards, I use big images that kind of fill up the space. So in this video, I'm challenging myself to use somewhat smaller dies to create sort of central focal points for the cards. So in our first example, I'm making a little ice cream sundae, and I'm just trying to decide which size square I want to use to sort of as a panel to put my ice cream scoop on. So I decided on the larger side. Then I'm going to die cut all of the ice cream pieces out of various color cardstocks. So I'm focusing on mostly a teal aqua color palette and then some neutrals and then bright red, and I cut out the stem in green for the cherry. And then I'm just adding some ink blending on the sides to sort of give it some more depth and dimension and some richness to the color since it's a rather simple and small image. So just adding some on the edge here, trying to create some more depth to these images. And for the vanilla ice cream, I did use a Distress Oxide of Antique Linen, which I think blends really nicely on this sort of off-white cardstock. And then I'll sort of glue all of my pieces together. I glued the cherry stem to the cherry, and then gluing sort of the bottom edge of the ice cream scoop to the ice cream, and then adding sort of the chocolate drizzle on top. And then finally all of the little sprinkles, which I placed and then glued. And then adding the cherry finally on top. I'm gonna add it to our little glass. And there's our little ice cream. Super cute. And in the background, I wanted sort of this gingham plaid, and I wanted it at an angle. So in the cardstock itself, it's horizontal and vertical to the shape of the page. So I'm cutting it at an angle here, trying to make sure I get 4¼ by 5½ so that I can apply it to the entire back of my card base. And it definitely took a little bit of finagling to get this just right. I ended up with a square that was 5½ by 5½, but it all worked out in the end. And so that creates our card panel for our card base. And then we're gonna, off screen, I cut out the rectangle with the stitching, and I decided I wanted to bring in some pink and peach tones, so I'm adding some ink blending. I'm not sure at the end of the day if I really loved how this turned out, but it does incorporate some of the colors from my sentiment that I ended up using into the actual card. So just sort of blending on the edge here. And then we'll apply the grapefruit ink to the corner edge, giving it sort of an orangey peach tint. And then I'm cutting out my sentiment, which forms the word "so sweet." So out of grapefruit cardstock, I'm cutting out the "so," and then out of the pink lemonade cardstock, or is it ballet slipper, I'm cutting out the "sweet." And then I want to give it lots of dimension, so I'm cutting out a bunch of white cardstock to go behind it for all of these pieces. And then I'm going to apply some double-sided adhesive to the backs so that when I die cut, it'll be really easy to glue these small pieces together. Now we're going to assemble the card. So we're putting our gingham plaid onto the background of our card base. And then just trimming off some excess cardstock. I can never quite get the measurements perfect. I always have to trim a little off the edge. And we're gonna add the panel just with some liquid adhesive. I thought about propping it up with some foam tape, but I don't have a whole lot of foam tape, so I just put that directly onto the card panel. And then we're gonna add our little ice cream, which again, I think is like the most adorable little image ever, right in the center. And I did play around with the layout of maybe doing an off center with the sentiment and stuff, but I ultimately decided to put it right in the middle there. And so the pinks and of our ink blended background match the cardstock of that sentiment. I'm going to add them at an angle here. And you can kind of see all that dimension. I think I ended up using 4 or 5 different layers, so it's really quite thick. And then I thought, just to bring out a little bit of richness, I'm gonna add some Aqua Shimmer Pen to the sentiment, just to bring a little glitter and fun to that sentiment. So just applying that here. A little difficult to see on the screen, but it is there. And then I'm adding some glossy accents to bring some dimension to our cherry. And then I'm going to add some glitter drops from Pinkfresh, and I think it's the Cherry Blossom or blush color, just again to bring in that pink and a little bit more sparkle. And here's our final card. I think it turned out really nicely. Again, not my typical style of card, but a good challenge nonetheless to sort of try and use smaller die cuts than I typically would use. And it really feels like you're at a soda shop or an ice cream shop. In our second card, I'm using a cactus die. So I cut out all those tiny die cuts. And now I'm cutting out a cardstock panel that is 3 3/4 by, I believe, it's sort of a 1/2 inch less on each side. So 3 3/4 and then 4 and 5 inches. 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And I decided to do a sort of fun splatter background, and I wanted to use the same cardstock I used, or the same colors that I used for the cardstock as the ink. So I'm using Rainforest and Sea Glass ink, which will form the cactus part of the card, of the cactus. So just sort of smushing it onto the back, spraying it with water, and then flicking it off. And then I also wanted to add some gold just to bring in a little more color. And so that comes from this metallic paint set from Altenew. So again, added those drops. And then, so here are all of our pieces. So I'm going to use the coordinating, for the most part, the coordinating ink colors to add some depth and dimension to our die cut pieces. So we've got Rainforest and then Sea Glass for our little like flowers that come off the cactus. And then we have a creamsicle pot, and then the chevron decorations are in Spice Cider, and then the new color Pimento. So just again adding some dimension to the left side with some ink. I really think the ink blending brings out it really makes those smaller die cuts really pop. I do not have the coordinating Pimento ink, so I'm just using a Pinkfresh, sort of a dark orange color. And then finally adding the Spice Cider. And it's all on that left edge, so it really does create the effect of a shadow. And then I'll glue all of my pieces together. So I'm creating this chevron pattern, alternating between Spice Cider cardstock and the Pimento cardstock. And just using our liquid adhesive here to add those pieces and then push them into place. Next, I'm adding the little flowers to the cactus base. And then there are 6 of 2 different sizes, and just kind of randomly placing them across our cactus. And then I'm going to glue the pot, put our little cactus in the pot, and let that dry. I'm adding some foam adhesive to the back. So this panel I did decide to prop up, and like I said, I don't have a lot of foam adhesive, so I use these tiny adhesive squares, which requires a lot of tiny squares to peel that sort of release paper back on. I'm also going to add foam tape to the back of the cactus. And since there are teeny tiny holes in the cactus, I ended up cutting the different pieces so you couldn't see the white through the holes, and that did take quite a bit of time, as you can see here. So just trying to like put in the tiny pieces so that they can't be seen through the holes, and it took quite a bit of repositioning and recutting, and yeah, a great effect, a lot of work. And then adding that again right in the middle of the card. I did play with different layouts of off-centering it, but I think right in the center worked really well. And then I'm adding, it's a hello die sentiment that cuts out individual letters. So I'm adding adhesive to the back of these. There's no dimension on this, it's just directly adhered to the card. I'm just trying to line that up. And these are very small letters, but I've recently just gotten into the habit of using the tweezers, which I do think really helps, but it does take some hand-eye coordination. But it is a lot less messy than trying to use my fingers. And I get glue everywhere when I craft. And so here is our second card. And you can kind of see the metallic golds flickering in the light as it catches the light. Again, a really simple card. I think it turned out really great. Thanks for watching. If you have some time, check out some of my other videos.